2 weeks ago, I towed my 8,000-pound enclosed trailer through the Appalachian Mountains with the 2.7-liter TurboMax, and although that engine did it just fine, it was a little bit of a bumpy road with that engine revving well above 5,000 RPM for long stretches. Oh boy. Oh boy. She is loving this. And a number of you guys said the only solution was to get my hands on a good old V8. And that's exactly what we've done. We have the 5.3 liter flagship GM V8 engine in these 1500s. And we're gonna see today whether or not this V8 is better or worse than that 2.7 liter TurboMax. Welcome back, I'm Alex, and we are once again at the crossroads of old school versus new school. Are the pushrod, naturally aspirated, big displacement V8s still the optimal workhorses for a good old pickup truck, or is something like the new school 2.7 liter TurboMax with all of its advanced technology in a smaller displacement engine putting the final nail in these V8 engines? And on paper, it's closer than you think. This 5.3 liter V8's putting out 355 horsepower as well as 385 pound-feet of torque. The 2.7 liter TurboMax is putting out 310 horsepower, but also putting out 430 pound-feet of torque. Now, if we add both those power numbers together, this 5.3 adds up to 738, and that 2.7 liter TurboMax adds up to 740. So on paper, at least, these two engines are actually extremely close in power output. But today isn't about crunching numbers on paper, it's about doing the real work. And while this is my 8,000-pound trailer, maximum wind resistance, extra tall, extra wide. We have the same water weights in the same location, giving us the exact same tongue weight. We also tow the same 120-mile loop through the Appalachian Mountains, ideally giving us a very good comparison between acceleration, pulling hills, fuel economy, and just generally how I feel about the truck and engine. Speaking of which, it's time to get this thing to work with our first acceleration test. We go 0 to 50 kilometers an hour. We put the truck in four-wheel drive, full throttle down, and we time it to see how well this engine translates its torque and power to the wheels to get that load moving off the line. We're in four-wheel drive, 3, 2, 1, to the floor. Oh, that instant torque. Bang, 50. Wow, that instant torque is a big difference over that turbo. Take two, 3, 2, 1, to the floor. Oh, such a difference, that instant torque. 50. So despite the feeling of instant torque and maybe better throttle response, the 2.7 liter was quicker off the line. In fact, the 5.3 liter is the worst or slowest truck I've tested. What's interesting is if we look at the torque figure, it seems to directly impact how quick a truck is off the line, which I guess ultimately makes a lot of sense. One thing that will affect getting torque down to the wheels is the driveline, and there are some differences between these two trucks we're looking at today, so we will get into that later in the video, but let's get this thing on the road and see what she's got. The torque out of this V8 compared to that 2.7 liter is night and day. The instant torque, the throttle response is way different. It's just, power is just instantly there. Don't get me wrong, a lot of you guys are probably screaming, well, that 2.7 liter turbo makes 90% of its peak torque at only 1500 RPM. And yes, soon as that turbo hits, that thing's like a little bit of a rocket ship. But until that turbo hits, the throttle pedal's just a little bit dead. It's the best way I can describe it. Speaking of acceleration, you guys might be able to hear that V8 rumble, but we are doing our second acceleration test, getting onto the highway. We'll go 60 kilometers to 110, our cruising speed. 60 to the floor. Well, I can say without a doubt, before even looking at the footage, that was miles quicker than that 2.7 liter. Not even close. Looking at the results here, the 5.3 liter sitting nice and close to that 5 liter Coyote. To nobody's surprise, the 3.5 liter EcoBoost still on top. But the 2.7 liter TurboMax really fell off on this acceleration test. Perhaps at these higher speeds, horsepower becomes much more of a factor. Once again, if we look at the horsepower numbers, it kind of falls in line with our acceleration results. So we got our cruise control set to 110 kilometers an hour. We are in tow haul mode, and like we always do, we'll just let the truck do its thing. There's two things I'm pretty interested in when it comes to this V8. First of all is fuel economy. That 2.7 liter was really not that efficient, running, I believe, 39.1 liters per 100 kilometers. I'll put the miles per gallon on the screen. Secondly, and most importantly, is our RPM control. Like I mentioned, that 2.7 liter was very high in the RPM band, reaching well over 5,000 RPMs many times and for long stretches. So I really want to see if this V8 can control its RPMs much better and therefore have a better towing experience with less drama. Speaking of which, here's a good first little hill. Nothing crazy, but it really tells me how these engines are gonna react. 2.7 liter revved well above 5,000 RPM to maintain speed. We dropped another gear, 109 still keeping speed. Another gear, 4,200 RPM. And I think we're gonna hold here. We're not gonna downshift again. Very nice from the V8. That was pretty clean. A lot less drama, I have to say. Here's our very long but steady hill. Again, a really nice test just to kind of see where these engines are sitting. Okay, so we downshift again, 4,200 RPMs. The 2.7 liter also was around 4,100 RPMs. The 3.5 liter EcoBoost, which is the best performer on my towing loop so far, was at 3,000 RPM. I was honestly hoping that this V8 wouldn't have to rev as high. I was hoping we'd stick around 3,000, 3,500 RPM. On our backstretch, we have much greater inclines and much bigger hills. Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see what happens to this engine on those bigger hills. I'm excited. Now, before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's head back to the shop because I really want to talk about driveline when it comes to this engine. Speccing out the right driveline for your truck and engine is extremely important when it comes to things like towing. This truck comes with our 10-speed 10L80 transmission, as well as 321 gears. Not really that advantageous for towing, but it's a standard gear set that comes with all of the GM and Chevy 1500 trucks. This gearing gives this truck, the way it's configured, a max tow rating of 9,200 pounds. Comparing this driveline to the 2.7 liter, that truck came with an 8-speed transmission as well as 342 gears. Now, yes, that gearing is a little bit more advantageous, but it does only come with an 8-speed transmission, 2 less gears than this truck. So there are some pros and cons. Regardless, the max tow rating of that truck was 8,900 pounds. So the max tow ratings between this truck and that truck are only about 300 pounds difference, which I find very interesting. One thing I like about the platform with the 5.3 liter is that it can be optioned with the max trailering package. We can get 342 gears back here, and that will raise your max towing capacity in this configuration of truck to just about 11,000 pounds. I guess my point is, despite having the big 5.3 liter V8 in your truck doesn't necessarily give you the greatest towing advantage. Really have to pay attention to your driveline configuration and specs in order to give the V8 the best possible chance of the best towing performance. Here's an interesting example. We're just coming to the top of a hill. We were only revving at like 3,600 RPM. This is much more what I expected out of this V8, trying to really keep those RPMs much better or much more under control. Again, quickly, here's another hill, and we're only sitting at 3,600 RPM. Very reasonable for this kind of weight as well as wind resistance. Honestly, kind of impressed at this point. This V8 is just much more in control of the RPMs, which again, I really like to see. Another thing that's impressive, that's actually surprising me, is our fuel economy. We're averaging 33.2 liters per 100 kilometers. That is by far the best fuel economy this far on our run. This could be the most efficient truck on our loop, but we'll keep an eye on it. This hill, the 2.7 liter struggled on mightily. She is loving this. Yeah, this V8, you know, we're still revving at 4,200 RPM, so still up in the RPM band, but we are not above 5,000 RPM, which is where the 2.7 liter was, which, you know, is okay, but not advantageous in my opinion. This is a little bit more tame, a little bit more under control, less likelihood of the engine just actually overheating. In terms of transmission, our temperature is 81 degrees Celsius, which is perfectly well within range. This 10-speed transmission was running much cooler than the 8-speed with the 2.7, which I find very interesting. Something I didn't notice at the time. In terms of what gear we tend to be sitting in, I thought we would be right around 7th gear, which is 1-to-1, but this thing actually still likes to ride on flat ground. I believe in 8th gear, which is still an overdrive gear, which I was not expecting. I thought we'd stick closer to a 1-to-1 gear ratio. Perhaps that's why our fuel economy is as good as it is. Well, we made it to our halfway point, the Irving, and we are parked with the big boys because this V8 is acting like a big boy. Very surprised how much better it is performing over the 2.7 liter thus far on our test. This 5.3 liter V8 has literally been around for a quarter century. I believe this engine debuted in 1999, and it is really cool to see GM stick with this form factor for so many years. Obviously, over the years, there have been different generations, different updates. I believe the second gen came out in 2006, 2007, and then the third gen came out in 2014, also known as the Ecotech 3. I gotta keep things honest with you guys. In my opinion, I just feel like this V8, 5.3 liters of displacement in 2024, soon 2025, is just a little bit underpowered. This thing's only putting out 355 horsepower. And well, if we look directly across at the competition, Ford, their 5-liter V8 puts out 400 horsepower, 410 pound-feet of torque. And well, like I said, the third generation, which is the current engine in these trucks, has been out for 10 years. And it's just, I would love to see GM update this platform just a little bit, give it a little bit more power, try pushing towards that 400 horsepower mark, 400 pound-feet of torque. At the end of the day, for those who want more power, there's always the big dog, the 6.2 liter. And maybe that's the strategy GM's playing for, is that you gotta upgrade to the 6.2 liter, pay a little bit more money, get that extra power, who knows? Rumor has it that I will be getting a 6.2 liter coming to me soon enough. And we'll be putting that thing on my towing loop. Really excited to see how it tows my enclosed trailer, so look forward to that. So we're back on the road. The 2.7 liter did not like this backstretch that we're currently on with this V8. We're already working, baby. 4,200 RPM. Like to see it. Not too shabby. I still think we have another gear to drop, which I will test in just a second here once we get to our next hill. We're putting this thing to work. Woo! 4,200 RPM. Back at her. She's chugging. 5,000 RPM. And as you guys can see, I mean, the camera doesn't really pick it up, but really not too much of a grade, you know, but we're maintaining speed very nicely. In my opinion, this is still relatively under control. So we've come to the biggest hill on our towing loop, right ahead of us there. Here we go. 3,000 RPM. Downshift 3,500 RPM, downshift 4,200 RPM, 108 kilometers an hour, 109 gaining speed, 110. I like it. I like it. Now, granted, the 5-liter from Ford was only at 3,500 RPM on this hill, but for our comparison today directly, the 2.7 liter was at 5,200 RPM. This is all she's got right now. Just barely keeping us at 106. And if I'm not mistaken, this thing can downshift. So I'm gonna put my foot to the floor and see this thing will downshift again. No, it will not downshift again. So we actually don't have another gear. This is all she's got. We are maintaining speed, so I can't complain. Well, I missed a shot of our last hill. Moral of the story is that this V8, it's just so much more in control of the RPMs. I mean, we're cruising at 1,500 RPM. We never saw that with a 2.7. It just couldn't cruise anywhere close to 1500 RPM. It liked to sit around 2500 RPM. And you know, we got another hill coming up here, and as you guys will see, we just don't rev as high. The engine does not have to work as hard. It can rely on its displacement so much better than that 2.7 liter, which literally had just about half the displacement. And you know, 3000 RPM. We'll probably downshift again here. There we go. And we move up the hill. It's drama free. And this is why people love to tow with V8s when it comes to gasoline engines. Literally at this point on our towing loop, our 2.7 liter was revving at like 4,000 RPM. She's just not happy. I think it was just tired. It was getting hot. This V8, not even sweating, 2,000 RPM, just chugging along. Just better in almost every facet. Well, I don't know what else there is to say. This thing is just better. On paper, obviously, like we talked about at the beginning of the video, the power numbers are relatively in the same ballpark, and the max towing figures are once again in the same ballpark. But in the real world, this thing is better at accelerating, better at pulling hills, better at RPM control. The engine worked not as hard, and most surprisingly, this thing was almost 25% more fuel efficient than that 2.7 liter. This thing finished with 30 liters per 100 kilometers, which is the most efficient engine I have towed with that enclosed trailer. So at least on my towing test, this V8 showed that indeed there is no replacement for displacement. It was better on basically every single towing performance metric. So if you guys are looking at a Chevy pickup truck and you will be needing to tow, I would highly consider looking at the 5.3 liter. But that's my conclusion anyways. Let me know what you guys think. Do you still think the V8 is still the ultimate workhorse? Always love hearing from you guys. Anyways, if you did like the video, don't forget to leave that thumbs up. And if you like cool stuff like this, don't forget to subscribe. But enough of me. We'll see you in the next freaking video.